When you hear the word trafficking, you may tend to think about victims of the illegal sex trade, and you wouldn't be wrong. But trafficking can extend well beyond that to affect many categories, including forced labor. In 2010, Royal Canadian Mounted Police made one of the largest human trafficking busts in Canadian history. 22 men and 1 woman were rescued by federal law enforcement agents after being brought into Canada and forced into construction. Now, in an exclusive 2-part series, our Stefanie Masotti speaks with one of the victims. She joins us. Stefanie.
Jim, Tomas Miko is originally from Hungary. He started working in construction in his home country at 18 years old. When he was 24, he was unemployed and in desperate need of a job to help feed his family. A job offer overseas seemed promising at the time. Miko quickly learned the job would be the most horrific experience of his life. Living in fear is how Tomas Miko spent the first 5 months in Canada.
They said if we ever try to go to the police, they're gonna find us, they're gonna kill us.
The 24-year-old, then unable to speak English, says he replayed this threat in his mind as he laid in a dark, unfinished basement in Ancaster.
If you open the window, the alarm system goes on. No shower, no toilet, nothing. Just concrete.
Miko says he was living in a nightmare. Memories of his hometown life kept him sane.
I was born in Hungary in a small town called Papa.
He says the town was poor. He was unable to find work until one day a woman approached him.
She said her sister living in Canada and her husband has a construction work and he can offer me a job with good money.
That man was Frank Demoter.
He said that he can offer me a job in a construction like drywall, installing tiles, paintings, stucco.
Miko says Demoter told him he would make $3,000 to $4,000 a month. He said he would also pay for Miko's flight to Canada. Miko was then instructed to apply for a passport. At customs, he would present a letter to officers that read,
I'm his wife's relatives and she's having a birthday in August and I came here to visit her and to see the Niagara Falls, the CN Tower in Toronto.
Miko landed at Pearson Airport in August 2009, where he was picked up from the airport and brought to Demoter's house in Ancaster. It was here that Miko says he made his first mistake.
They convinced me to give them my passport, identification, everything, and they kept telling me just to make sure nobody's gonna steal your ID.
Miko says he was then given permission to call his family back home and inform them he had arrived safely.
After the conversation, they told me that we're gonna show you where you're gonna sleep, and they took me down to the basement.
He immediately began working, but soon learned the job wouldn't pay. Day after day, the same routine.
We never get any kind of breakfast, we just had a quick coffee, if we get any coffee. And after 14, 16 hours work, we was feeding by leftovers.
He says he was never physically abused, but at least one of the 6 other men he lived with wasn't so lucky.
He was beaten up, he had purple spots on his face. He looked really bad.
Miko says long hours and poor working conditions made him sick. He says Demoter still forced him to work. One day, an outside contractor picked him up and drove him to the construction site. Miko told him of the unhealthy conditions he was living in. That man then went to police. During this time, RCMP Constable Lipa Jankovic was already investigating.
I had found out from CBSA there was quite a number of people coming over to Canada at the same addresses. And we started doing some surveillance at these addresses, and we found that there was a lot of men in basements, and they're going to work every day. And as we started investigating, that's when we actually found out about Tomas.
In January 2012, Jankovic and her team pulled up at the Ancaster home where they found Tomas sitting in a white van.
He was hunched forward and his eyes looked like they were going to fall out of his head. He looked so scared and he was so thin and he didn't want to move out of the car.
Jankovic made her first attempt to communicate.
I had a little hand note that I created in Hungarian language, and it said, I am Canadian police. I can help you. You do not have to stay here. You can come with me and be safe.
Miko says he looked over to the contractor who said,
Don't think about it, just go.
Miko left with the RCMP officer, but the battle wasn't over. In the second part of this series, how Miko finally escaped his traffickers, made his way to Windsor to start a new life. Jim?
After what you described, Stephanie, you wondered, the poor gentleman probably wondered who he could trust at this point.
Oh, it was very hard when you don't have money, you don't have your passport, you don't know the language. He had no other option.
And somebody says they're a police officer, they are, but can you trust them?
Exactly.
We'll see you tomorrow on that. Stefanie Masotti tonight. Thank you. Now, last night, Stephanie introduced you to a victim of human trafficking, not the sex trade this time, but forced to work in construction. In the second part of her series, we take a look at Tomas Miko's transition to a new life after being under someone else's control, working in unsafe conditions, also living in fear. Stephanie.
Jim, last night we heard how and why Miko left his home country, Hungary, and came to Canada. Even after being rescued by the RCMP, his struggles were far from over.
We can put you in a safe place, we can protect you.
Words Tomas Miko has been waiting to hear for months.
They said if we ever try to go to the police, they're gonna find us, they're gonna kill us.
Miko spent months living in fear, sleeping on the floor in an Ancaster basement, working 14 to 16 hours in construction every day.
He was hunched forward and his eyes looked like they were going to fall out of his head. He looked so scared and he was so thin and he didn't want to move out of the car.
He fled that life with RCMP Constable Lepa Jankovic and headed for the Salvation Army in St. Catharines. He soon learned the traffickers wouldn't stop there.
Smoking outside, front of the door, the car slows down, passing by the front door, and Emil recognized those people in the car. He just grabbed me inside and told the recipients to call the police.
Miko says these people worked for Demoter. Police then escorted him and his friend to Bradford in the middle of the night. After a few days, they made their way to Windsor, where the Salvation Army was waiting for them.
We were asked by an organization out of the Toronto region called Walk With Me to assist these men because they were continually being found by the traffickers.
Shortly after arriving in Windsor, Shelley Gilbert of We Fight took Miko under her wing.
The transitioning into their new life is one of the biggest obstacles for individuals. Sometimes it's language, like Tomas. Sometimes it's finishing school. It's also, depending on the length of time that they were held in captivity, the amount of control that was exerted over them.
But Miko's transition into a new life wasn't her only concern.
My father was scared, my brothers didn't even go to school.
Miko says his family back home in Hungary was constantly being threatened by Demoter, who he says offered the family money for Miko's whereabouts, but they refused. Fearing for their safety, they decided to record one of the phone conversations with Demoter. The audio was sent to Gilbert, who then handed it over to the RCMP. Soon, Miko's mother, father, 2 brothers, and sister were brought to Canada.
Tomas's family hadn't seen him in 2 years, so it was an incredibly emotional experience. We truly want survivors to be able to come forward to testify bravely and courageous like Tomas did and the other victims in this case. We also have to be responsible to some extent to those family members that are left behind in the country of origin.
Police say they couldn't have saved Miko alone.
We need those non-government organizations like Walk With Me to help us take care of these victims and to find them homes and to bring them back to themselves.
Experts say it can take 3 years for a survivor to fully transition into their new life.
Imagine you come to a country where you don't know anyone, you don't know the language, you don't know where you are. You have no identification, you have no money in your pocket. You've been told that you can't trust the police.
In total, 21 people were charged, convicted, and deported to their home country as part of this bust, including ringleader Ferenc Demoter.
We just need people out there to know that this is happening in Canada. It's all across our country, coast to coast. Look at your neighbors, know who they are, know what's going on in your neighborhood.
As you can see today, Miko can speak English and is working on completing his education. He tells us he hopes his story will encourage others in these types of situations to come forward to police.
You know, most cynical of all, Stephanie, is the person in their home country who recruited them, one of their own countrymen.
Of course.
They were very trusting and were taken advantage of.
I know. You think, you know, you're both Hungarian, just like you're both Italian. You think you'll be able to help each other out, but, you know, that trust is lost.
I hope that person will be prosecuted as well. Stephanie, thank you.